Good morning. This is Mr. G. We're going to talk about Chapter 8, Section 1. And I'm here with my favorite class, Second Hour History.
Hello!
Alright, Chapter 8, Section 1. Basically, we get started with what the states wanted from the national government. The American Revolution is over with. States wanted to keep the power. They just got out of a bad relationship with the king who held the power. They just fought an American Revolution for taxation without representation. And so they wanted the new republic, or the new nation, to be republic. Republicanism is where the people shall rule themselves. The national government was to bind the 13 states together. So the national government is going to keep the 13 states, bind them together, like a loose brotherhood. And this is my artistic drawing of it. This is called the Articles of Confederation, where each of the 13 states were separate. They each had their own government, but they are drawn together to a national government. They had a couple of responsibilities, but for the most part, their power would stay with the states. They did not want to give up their power to another federal government because they didn't want another king. Now, the powers that the states had under the Articles of Confederation, the states held the real power, like I said. The states had the power to tax. This is going to be a test question, quiz question. The Articles of Confederation could not tax. That's why it was weak. The states had the power to enforce laws. The states had the power to regulate trade. So going back to that, those are three main powers that our federal government today has, but it did not have under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was our first government. That's not going to last more than 10 years because of this reason right here. It did not have the power to tax. It did not have the power to enforce laws. It did not have the power to regulate trade. Voting requirements are going to change. It used to be that you had to own property to vote. Actually, if we go back to the New England Times, you had to be a property owner, a white male who belonged to the church. Well, church requirements are gone, and property ownership is going to start to go away also. And basically all that's left now is going to be a white male. So unfortunately, females, I apologize, you will not get the right to vote till 1920 from the 19th Amendment, and African Americans will not receive the right to vote until 1870, which is the 15th Amendment. People that were not allowed to vote at this point, African Americans. There we go, 15th Amendment, women, the 19th Amendment. I actually told you the wrong answer, but yeah, 1920, 19th Amendment, I was right. Now, powers denied to Congress. These are the things, the powers that Congress did not have. And the reason they didn't want them to have these powers is because they didn't want to have another king. So, the Articles of Confederation did not really have an executive branch. No executive branch. No president. Nobody, not one person in charge. Now, they had an executive branch or executive, like 3 people that would run the meetings and stuff, but there was no Mr. President like we have today. The nation did not have a chief executive, no leadership, no head of state. The states didn't want another king. That's very important that you understand. The states did not want another king. The courts, judicial branch, which we have today. Under the Articles of Confederation, there was no judicial branch. And the reason for no judicial branch was the states already had one. They already had a court system, and they wanted to keep the power at the state level. Again, these are 2 important concepts that we've talked more than once. And the problem with not having a judicial branch is the federal government could not interpret and enforce the law. Each state can make their own law. For example, under the Articles of Confederation, Michigan could pass a law that says you go to jail if you're a Bears fan. And Illinois could pass a law that said you go to jail if you're a Lions fan. Okay? Well, every state could do whatever they wanted to without the federal government getting involved and telling them that you can't do that. It's a violation of rights. Everybody should be required to be a Bears fan. Legislative branch. It did have a legislative branch, but it was weak. It was one house, or called unicameral. We have a bicameral system today, bi meaning two houses. The Articles of Confederation was one house. Laws were difficult to pass because they needed approval of 9 states. Now, I'll give you a little example here. I'm going to ask my class a question. They have a choice. Today we're going to go to lunch, and I'm going to buy a McDonald's or Burger King, but we have to have at least 3/4 of the people agree. So everybody in class, by saying yes, who wants to go to McDonald's?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to try it again. If you want to go to McDonald's, say yes.
Yes.
If you want me to buy a Burger King, say yes.
Yes.
See, no one's going to get anything because they didn't have 3/4 of the vote. So nothing will be passed. We would never probably be able to decide where we're going to go because 3/4 of the people is hard to get to agree on anything. That's why today it's majority rules. Congress is responsible to the states, not the people. Okay? And Congress had no power to collect taxes, regulate trade, or coin money. That's important. Collect taxes. You're going to see that. They had no power to collect taxes. Something else that came out of the Articles of Federation, which was actually positive, was the Land Ordinance of 1785. This is how we're going to add new states. Basically, they had all this land. They had to divide it up after the American Revolution, and so they would survey it, and they'd have plots. And if you look at this plot, it's a, let's see, it's 6 by 6, so it's 36 square miles. And each plot had to have so many set aside for revolutionary veterans. A plot had to be set aside for a school. That's why we have townships today. And we have, a school and a township. And that's why a lot of the country roads around here are a mile by a mile. They're kind of laid up on a grid system because the Land Ordinance of 1785 set that up. And so they surveyed it, and then when people started to populate, under the Northwest Ordinance, they could become a state. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states are going to become states after the American Revolution because of the Northwest Ordinance. And when they have 5,000 free males of voting age, they could self-govern. They could become a territory. And after they had 60,000, they could apply for statehood. And like I said, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, those 5 are going to become states because of the Northwest Ordinance. Now this is important. Why is Michigan a non-slave state? Because all these states added the Northwest Ordinance, slavery was not allowed. They could not bring slavery into any new lands created by the Northwest Ordinance. All right, let's talk about problems with Britain and Spain. Why was the Confederation Congress able to resolve these problems with Britain and Spain? Unable, yes. So our government couldn't deal with because they had no power. Britain competed against American fur trade by refusing to evacuate its military forts. So even though we just beat them in the American Revolution, they're still out there. They haven't gone home. And that's why we're going to have something called the War of 1812, which is going to be like a second revolution because the British are not leaving. They also did not allow American-owned ships in the Caribbean. So they're picking on us. And unless you can fight back, people are going to keep picking on you. And our government could not deal with it. Spain also put up barriers to American shipping in the Caribbean. Spain refused Americans the use of New Orleans at the end of the Mississippi, which is a very important port to get your supplies and crops out. And again, the Articles of Confederation could not deal with these issues. And they also argued over the boundaries of Florida. So without an executive branch and the power to regulate trade, it lost the respect of nations because it could not resolve disputes. So really, even though we were an independent nation, no one respected us because we had no power. Well, that's a problem. And so what's the basic weakness of our national government? We already talked about it. It had no power to stand up to foreign countries that could not raise taxes. So basically, they made a government that was weak. Now, the question is, why did they make this government? Well, the reason they made the government is because they just got out of a bad relationship. And it was with a king. The king had all the power, and they never wanted to have another king again. So that's why they made sure they put themselves in the position not to have a king. And they did, but they realized it's not going to work. Shays' Rebellion is going to be one of the things that are going to open up their eyes. Shay was a farmer. We saw this in the video. And when farmers' income decreased while taxes increased, farmers could not pay their debts, and so they were losing their farms. And so Shay, Daniel Shay, and a bunch of other supporters and farmers went to the state courthouse in Massachusetts, and they basically captured the courthouse to stop anybody from losing their farm. And it was a rebellion. And because of this rebellion, our federal government could not send any troops because they had no power. Massachusetts had to squash this rebellion. Now, why is that important? The reason it's important is it convinced many people the U.S. needed a new government. And so we're going to take today's section only, talk about the Articles of Confederation, its failures and weaknesses, and we're going to get started talking about today's government we have today, which is the Constitution of the United States. The Articles of Confederation need to be replaced, and that's what Daniel Shay helped us open our eyes to replace the Articles.